The morning started like any other for Daniel Wright. He woke before the alarm, as he always did. Years in the service had trained his body to rise early, even long after the uniform was folded away for good. The small apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of traffic outside and the steady breathing of his son asleep in the next room. Daniel moved carefully, not wanting to wake the boy. He washed his face, shaved quickly, and put on a clean shirt. Nothing fancy, just neat. He believed in looking respectful, even on ordinary days. Especially on ordinary days. In the kitchen, he packed a small bag with snacks, water, and a worn paperback book. His son liked to read during long trips, even if he mostly stared at the pictures. Daniel smiled at that thought. Being a single father had taught him patience in ways the military never did. When the boy finally woke, rubbing his eyes and yawning, Daniel knelt down and helped him tie his shoes. They talked about school, about a test coming up, about nothing important at all. Those small talks mattered most to Daniel. They made life feel steady. They were traveling that day to visit a family clinic several hours away. It was cheaper than the local one, and Daniel had learned long ago how to stretch every dollar. The trip meant taking public transport, which he didn't mind. He preferred it. You saw real people there. Real life. By the time they reached the station, it was already busy. People stood in long lines, some checking their phones, others arguing softly, some looking tired before the day had even begun. Daniel kept his son close, a hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. When the vehicle arrived, it filled quickly. Seats were taken fast. Daniel found two near the middle and guided his son into the window seat. He took the one beside him. He placed the bag under his feet and sat straight, eyes moving calmly across the space, a habit he never lost. A few stops later, more people got on. Among them was a young woman in a military uniform. Daniel noticed her right away, not because of the uniform alone, but because of how she carried herself. Her back was straight, her movements controlled. She looked tired but alert, like someone trained to stay ready even when exhausted. She stood for a moment, scanning the area, then took an empty seat across the aisle. She placed her bag on her lap and looked straight ahead. No phone, no headphones, just quiet focus. Daniel didn't stare, but he noticed details without meaning to. The slight mark under her eyes, the way her boots were worn but clean. She looked young, but not unsure. Still, there was something careful about her, as if she didn't want to draw attention. The vehicle continued on, growing louder. A group of passengers boarded at the next stop. They were talking loudly, laughing, pushing past others to get inside. Their voices filled the space, changing the mood. One of them glanced at the young soldier, then looked away. Another followed his gaze. A few seconds later, someone scoffed under his breath. Daniel noticed the shift, the way the air seemed tighter around that row of seats. At first, it was nothing obvious. Just looks. Small comments spoken just loud enough to be heard. Words that could be brushed off if someone wanted to pretend they meant nothing. The soldier kept her eyes forward. Her hands stayed folded on her bag. Her face did not change. Daniel felt a familiar tension in his chest. He had felt it many times before, in places where respect disappeared quietly, without warning. He told himself to stay calm. Maybe it would pass. His son leaned closer and whispered something about being hungry. Daniel nodded and handed him a snack, keeping his voice low. He didn't want the boy to notice anything else yet. The vehicle moved again, stopping and starting. More people boarded. Space grew tighter. Someone stood too close to the soldier, brushing past her shoulder. Another muttered something about uniforms taking up seats. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Not yet. He looked at the soldier again. She had shifted slightly, making herself smaller, trying not to be in the way. Daniel recognized that move. He had done it himself once, long ago, in a different place, when speaking up felt harder than staying silent. Around them, others pretended not to notice. Eyes stayed on phones. Heads turned toward windows. Silence, thick and heavy. Daniel felt the weight of a choice forming, though nothing had fully happened yet. He hated that feeling. The moment before something went wrong. The moment when people decided who they were going to be. The soldier adjusted her bag and crossed her ankles neatly. Her hands trembled just a little, then steadied. Daniel saw that too. He wondered how old she was. Too young to be treated like that, he thought. Then he corrected himself. No one deserved it, no matter their age. The vehicle hit a bump. Someone laughed loudly. Another voice said something sharp, aimed directly across the aisle this time. It wasn't shouted, but it was clear enough. The soldier finally looked down. Daniel inhaled slowly through his nose. He felt his heartbeat slow, the way it always did when his mind shifted into a different mode. Not anger, focus. He glanced at his son, who was chewing his snack, unaware. Daniel placed a gentle hand on the boy's knee, grounding himself. This was still part one of the story, though Daniel didn't know it. To him, it was just another day. Just another moment where the world tested what kind of man he was going to be. Outside, the city rolled past. Inside, something quiet but important was beginning to form. The moment passed for most people as quickly as a blink, but for Daniel, it stretched longer. The soldier sitting across the aisle remained tense. Her hands gripped the strap of her bag a little too tightly. Her eyes darted occasionally toward the group of people who seemed determined to make her uncomfortable. Daniel could feel it too, the quiet pressure of someone being treated as less than they were. At first, it was small things. Murmurs, just audible, quick glances that lingered a second too long. A laugh that seemed to follow her. Daniel watched carefully, noticing how she straightened, then relaxed, then straightened again. Her uniform didn't shield her from these moments, not completely. No badge, no rank could stop people from judging before they looked. The group was clearly amused, though only among themselves. A man, middle-aged, with a voice that carried more authority than it deserved, muttered, "You sure you belong in that seat?" and smirked without looking at anyone in particular. Another younger laughed quietly and nudged the first. Daniel's fingers tightened around the edge of his seat, hidden under the armrest. He didn't move yet. He wanted to see how she handled it first. She deserved the first chance to respond. The soldier didn't. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She just adjusted her bag and shifted slightly, hoping it would pass. She was small, quiet, and careful, but Daniel recognized that she was not fragile. The air of control she carried wasn't about arrogance. It was about training herself to endure unfairness and not give it power. A few moments later, one of the men leaned in slightly, pretending to stretch, but loud enough that the words were clear. "Why don't you move, little lady? This is hardly your seat, is it?" His tone was mocking, meant to make her smaller. A few heads turned, just enough for the soldier to notice, just enough for Daniel to realize the situation was escalating. The soldier's fingers clenched lightly around the bag strap. Daniel saw it. Her knuckles were white for a brief moment. Then she relaxed, straightened her shoulders, and looked ahead again. The quiet dignity of it struck him. She could have reacted. She could have argued. She could have stood up for herself in the way that the world sometimes expects you to. But she chose another path, endurance without surrender. Daniel's mind raced, remembering moments from his own past. Times when someone had tried to belittle him, to push him down simply because of who he was. He had stood firm, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly. He knew that look she wore, that careful, steady endurance. It wasn't weakness. It was power measured in patience. He glanced down at his son, who was now fiddling with a small toy he had brought along. The boy was too young to fully understand what was happening, but Daniel wanted to shield him from seeing the soldier hurt. He also wanted to teach him something important. There was a way to see injustice, and a way to act on it, without turning life into chaos. Another remark came. Soft but cutting. Maybe this isn't for girls anyway. The man said it casually, like a joke, but everyone could hear it. Daniel felt a surge of something familiar, anger, yes, but also resolve. He had a choice now. He could stay silent and let the world decide what was acceptable, or he could step in. But he needed to do it carefully, calmly, effectively, like he had been trained to in situations that demanded precision, not force. Before he could act, the soldier finally shifted. She looked up briefly, meeting Daniel's eyes. There was a flicker there, a silent question, a small plea for help, though not in words. Daniel understood immediately. She didn't want someone to fight for her because she couldn't. She wanted someone to fight because it was the right thing to do. Not because she was asking. Not because she was special. Simply because no one deserves to be treated this way. Daniel nodded slightly, just barely, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement. He was not a man who sought attention, but he understood his role. The bullies were relying on silence. They counted on it. Someone speaking up, even quietly, could change the dynamic. The soldier's posture remained perfect, her uniform neat, her gaze forward. But her body betrayed small signs of fatigue. It was clear this wasn't the first time someone had assumed she would yield. She had been trained for much worse, certainly, but it didn't make her feelings any less valid. She deserved respect. Every human did. The group of men noticed Daniel now. A subtle shift in the air occurred. One of them glanced at him, sensing something different. Perhaps he looked like someone who wouldn't back down. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned slightly forward, resting his arm on the back of the seat in front of him, his presence steady, deliberate. He did not move aggressively. He did not threaten. He just existed in that moment, as a reminder that respect was expected. Another man tried again, louder this time. Hey, maybe you should stand up. Let someone else sit. You're taking space you don't need. The words hung in the air, casual cruelty. The soldier adjusted her bag again, slowly, as if preparing herself to move. Daniel felt a pang of frustration. She shouldn't have to. Not here. Not for people like this. He stood slightly, careful not to jostle his son, who looked up with wide eyes. She's fine where she's sitting, Daniel said firmly, low, but loud enough for the group to hear. Everyone deserves a seat, don't you think? His voice wasn't aggressive, but it carried authority. Years of commanding attention without force. Years of learning how to make people listen when volume wasn't enough. The group froze. A brief pause. No one had expected someone to intervene, especially someone who wasn't part of the soldier's world. The man who had spoken first stared, as if seeing Daniel for the first time. Daniel held his gaze steady. He was calm, but unmistakable. He was not going to allow this. The soldier's eyes flicked to Daniel. Relief, subtle and fleeting, passed through her expression. She relaxed slightly, the tight grip on her bag loosening. Daniel noticed the almost imperceptible exhale, a tiny release of tension. He didn't speak again. There was no need. The bullies had been reminded that someone cared enough to step in, that someone would not let their arrogance go unchecked. A woman sitting nearby whispered softly to a friend, finally. Daniel caught the words. He did not turn. He did not seek recognition. He simply stayed where he was, a quiet anchor in the middle of chaos. Around him, the atmosphere shifted. The group no longer laughed or mocked. They exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this calm defiance. They still held a little power in numbers, but the moment had changed. Daniel returned to his seat fully, giving a nod to the soldier, barely noticeable. She acknowledged it with a small, almost imperceptible smile. That was enough. That small, human connection, acknowledgement of her dignity, was what mattered most. The rest of the journey continued with less tension, though the echoes of the earlier moment remained. Daniel noticed her posture relax slightly, her eyes less tense. She occasionally glanced toward him, not in expectation, but in acknowledgement. He returned her glance each time, not with words, but with understanding. For the next hour, Daniel watched quietly, keeping his son entertained, making small jokes and comments, ensuring the boy stayed unaware of the full weight of what had just happened. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because the soldier's struggle was hers alone to manage. He had stepped in. That was all. At one point, the soldier leaned back, closed her eyes briefly, and let herself breathe. Daniel understood the small victory in that. Life often offered little moments like this, victories without applause. It was a reminder that human decency didn't always need recognition. Sometimes it was just about standing up when needed. He reflected on his own past, remembering the times he had been in similar situations. The quiet acts that defined him more than any award, any medal, any rank. The choice to act with integrity, even when no one was watching, even when the world seemed indifferent. That was what mattered. As the city passed outside the windows, the soldier's uniform bright under the morning sun, Daniel felt a quiet pride. Not for himself, exactly, but for the fact that someone had been spared humiliation, someone had been treated with the respect they deserved. The small human victories mattered most. They were reminders that decency was not a lost art. The vehicle slowed for another stop. More people came aboard. Conversation, chatter, and movement filled the space again. But the moment had shifted. Daniel could feel it. The energy had changed. The soldier now sat with a little more confidence. She moved her bag carefully, but without fear. She had regained a small piece of her space in the world. Daniel glanced at his son, who had grown quiet again, engrossed in the toy. The boy didn't know the lesson of the morning, but Daniel hoped he would carry it anyway. Seeing wrongs and knowing when to act. Standing up, even quietly, for what is right. Protecting those who cannot speak up in that moment. Teaching by example, without needing words. The soldier adjusted her uniform one last time before the next stop. She looked around briefly, eyes meeting Daniel's once more. A subtle nod. Gratitude without words. Daniel returned it with a small, understanding smile. That was enough. It didn't need anything more. And in that simple, unspoken exchange, the quiet truth was clear. Sometimes being human meant stepping in, standing steady, offering respect when it was missing. Small acts, unnoticed by many, carried more weight than grand gestures. Daniel knew that, and the soldier knew it too. Both understood that dignity could not be taken lightly, and sometimes the smallest gestures made the biggest difference. The vehicle hummed along steadily, carrying its passengers through the early morning light. The city blurred outside the windows, a mixture of buildings, trees, and streets, waking up to the day. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted subtly after the quiet confrontation. The soldier across the aisle now held her bag with less tension. Her shoulders, while still straight, seemed lighter, as if she had reclaimed a small piece of her space. Daniel noticed it and allowed himself a small sigh of relief. It wasn't a victory in headlines or medals. It was just a human moment. A moment that mattered more than any applause could. Daniel's son had become distracted with a small notebook, scribbling shapes and letters, humming softly. Daniel glanced down at him, smiling. The boy's innocence was a reminder of why moments like this were important. He wanted his son to see courage, even in quiet ways. To understand that standing up for someone didn't always require shouting or confrontation. Sometimes it required patience, timing, and a calm voice. That was the kind of lesson Daniel hoped to teach without ever saying it aloud, but the quiet relief didn't last long. The group of men who had been harassing the soldier still sat nearby, their whispers and chuckles barely restrained. Daniel could feel the tension return, faint but unmistakable. One of them, emboldened perhaps by the silence that followed his first rebuke, leaned over slightly, whispering something to his friend. Daniel couldn't catch the words, but he could feel their intent. They were not done. They wanted the soldier to feel small again, to doubt herself. Daniel stayed seated, his hands resting on his knees, calm but ready. He wasn't going to let them escalate this further. He had seen too much to ignore it. Years in service had taught him that timing and presence could stop a situation before it got worse. He didn't need to confront loudly. He only needed to show that he was present and aware. The soldier noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the quiet vigilance in his eyes. There was a brief exchange, nothing verbal, just a recognition. She adjusted her bag again, this time without haste. Her fingers rested lightly on the strap. Daniel could see the smallest hint of gratitude in her expression, a fleeting glance that spoke volumes. No words were needed. Actions had already communicated what mattered most. She was not alone. The younger of the men, growing impatient, decided to test the waters again. He leaned slightly, just enough for Daniel to see the movement out of the corner of his eye. The soldier stiffened, bracing herself. Daniel took a subtle breath, steadying himself. He could feel the presence of the boy next to him, the responsibility of modeling what courage looked like without endangering anyone. "Hey," the man said, louder this time, though still attempting to sound casual. "Maybe it's time you moved. This seat isn't really for you, is it?" The tone was mocking, designed to provoke. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice low, calm, and deliberate. "She can stay where she's sitting. Everyone deserves a seat," he said, firm, with a measured authority that left no room for argument. Not a shout, not a threat, just clarity. The group froze again. Their confidence faltered, replaced by a quiet uncertainty. They hadn't expected anyone to speak with such calm authority. Daniel could feel their attention shift toward him, a mixture of curiosity and irritation. He didn't look angry. He didn't glare. He simply existed in that space with presence and quiet strength. Presence was sometimes enough. Sometimes it spoke louder than words ever could. The soldier's fingers relaxed further on her bag. She allowed herself a subtle, almost imperceptible sigh. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but the change in her demeanor was enough to show that she had regained a measure of control over the situation. Daniel watched her carefully, understanding that for her, this moment was not about him. It was about maintaining dignity in a world that often tried to take it away. He respected that deeply. The vehicle moved again, slowing slightly as it approached another stop. People shuffled in and out. A few glanced curiously at the soldier, noting her uniform, perhaps unaware of what had just occurred. The group of men, now less bold, kept to themselves, muttering under their breath, but no longer targeting her directly. The balance of the situation had shifted, thanks to a small, steady intervention. Daniel remained seated, careful not to make a show of it. Heroics were never about appearances. They were about the impact on those who needed it most. At one point, Daniel's son looked up from his notebook. "Dad, why were they saying those things?" he asked softly, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Daniel leaned slightly, keeping his voice quiet, gentle. "Sometimes," he said, choosing his words carefully, "people forget that everyone deserves respect. It's not about who they are or what they wear. It's about being decent." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but absorbing the lesson in the way only children do. By watching, by sensing the calm and steady way his father handled the moment. The soldier shifted again, slightly more relaxed now, though her eyes remained alert. She seemed to be assessing the remaining passengers, aware but less tense. Daniel noticed the small changes in posture, the subtle easing of her grip on the bag. Each tiny movement told him she was reclaiming her space, slowly but surely. She didn't need him to fix everything, only to be present until she could stand on her own. That was the type of help that mattered most. The vehicle jolted slightly, and a few passengers stumbled. The soldier's hands went instinctively to steady herself, a reflex of discipline ingrained over years of training. Daniel saw the precision in her movements, the control and poise that came from rigorous preparation. She was young, yes, but the way she carried herself showed strength that many adults never learned. Strength, however, didn't always protect against cruelty. That was where human presence, simple and steady, could make a difference. The group of men whispered among themselves again. Their confidence had eroded, but they were still present. Daniel's eyes met theirs, calm but unwavering. There was no threat in his gaze, only clarity and resolve. Sometimes that alone was enough to remind people of boundaries. Sometimes presence and courage were more powerful than any argument or confrontation. The vehicle was filled with a mixture of tension and relief, a silent battle of wills that few could see, but all could feel. The soldier finally exhaled fully, letting her shoulders drop slightly. Daniel noted the subtle shift, the quiet victory in a small movement. He understood that her endurance was her own. She didn't need him to speak for her forever. She only needed someone to show that there were people who would not allow injustice to go unnoticed. That simple act of witnessing, of intervening, could carry as much weight as any speech or action. Minutes passed. The city outside the windows continued to blur into streaks of light and color. Inside, the energy shifted again. Conversations rose in other parts of the vehicle, but the soldier remained calm, her body language slowly returning to its natural poise. Daniel continued to observe, careful not to intrude, but present in the way that mattered most. His son played quietly, occasionally glancing up at him with trust in his eyes. The next stop brought more passengers, and the vehicle grew crowded. Some looked at the soldier with curiosity, some with indifference. The group of men no longer tried to provoke her. Their focus had shifted, their dominance challenged and diminished. Daniel remained seated, a quiet anchor, allowing the soldier to adjust and breathe. He understood the value of restraint, the power of steady presence over aggression. Finally, after several stops, the soldier shifted slightly, preparing to stand for a moment. Daniel noticed her hesitance, the careful calculations in her movements. She didn't need to leave her seat, but she was aware of the social expectations and pressures around her. He could see the tiny conflict in her posture, the push and pull of endurance and self-respect. Without a word, Daniel rose slightly, offering his seat with a subtle gesture. Not because she asked, not because anyone demanded it, but because it was the right thing to do. He didn't make a show of it, only indicated quietly that she could use the space if needed. The soldier's eyes met his, a small recognition passing between them. A silent exchange of understanding, trust, and respect. No words could fully capture the gratitude in her gaze dot as she shifted to take a small step. Daniel guided his son gently, making space without drawing attention. The soldier moved into the area, adjusting her bag lightly. Daniel returned to his seat, observing how the small act had restored balance. It wasn't about praise or recognition. It was about dignity. Human dignity, simple and undeniable, the rest of the journey began to feel lighter. The soldier now moved with more confidence, her presence no longer overshadowed by intimidation. Daniel watched, noting the change, understanding that small gestures, steady presence, and simple courage could make a profound difference. No one needed to announce it. No one needed to witness it fully. The impact was already clear, quietly transformative, and deeply human. Daniel leaned back in his seat, letting the vehicle carry them forward. His son played quietly, unaware of the full depth of what had just happened. Daniel allowed himself a small smile, knowing that some lessons were taught not in words, but in action. Courage, presence, and respect, those were the things that mattered most. And in that simple human exchange, those lessons had been given, quietly, without fanfare, but profoundly. The vehicle moved steadily along the route, carrying the passengers, through a city that was slowly waking to the morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting patterns across the seats, highlighting small details, wrinkles in jackets, worn scuffs on shoes, the crease of a uniform. Daniel kept his eyes partly on his son, partly on the soldier across the aisle. She seemed calmer now, but there was a quiet focus about her that suggested she had not yet fully let go of the tension. It was the focus of someone trained to handle pressure, to measure every situation carefully, and to act only when necessary. Daniel watched her adjust her bag once more, tucking it neatly against her feet. She moved with precision, each motion deliberate, as if each had a purpose. He could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, then stiffened again as she surveyed the other passengers. She was aware of her surroundings, aware of the lingering presence of those who had tried to unsettle her earlier. She had endured quietly, but now she was moving back into a space of confidence. Daniel felt a quiet respect for her. This was not just courage. It was controlled courage. And it was something he understood deeply. At one of the stops, a few new passengers boarded. Some glanced curiously at the soldier, taking in her uniform, but none said anything. The earlier bullies had returned to their seats, quieter than before, their laughter subdued. Daniel noticed the shift. The balance in the vehicle had changed. Quiet authority, steady resolve, and human presence had done their work. The soldier's demeanor remained alert but less tense. She had weathered the storm and come out intact. Daniel's son tugged lightly at his sleeve, drawing his attention. "Dad, she's really brave," the boy said softly, eyes wide with admiration. Daniel smiled faintly, ruffling his hair. "She is," he said. "But bravery isn't just in fighting. Sometimes it's in staying calm when others try to make you feel small. And sometimes it's knowing that people will help you when it's needed." His words were simple, but his meaning carried weight. Even in small ways, he wanted his son to understand the lessons of human decency, of standing up and helping others when the situation demanded it. The soldier glanced at them briefly, offering a faint, almost imperceptible smile. There was no acknowledgement of thanks in words, but her eyes conveyed a quiet gratitude. Daniel understood that. She didn't need to speak it. The act itself, the simple offering of presence and respect, had been enough. Some gestures required no applause. Some moments were powerful precisely because they were understated. The journey continued, the cityscape outside changing slowly. Buildings rose, streets narrowed, and the early morning bustle became a steady hum of life. Daniel noticed the soldier occasionally shifting her gaze toward the window, observing the world beyond the vehicle. There was a sense of introspection in those moments, a reflection that went beyond the immediate situation. He wondered what thoughts crossed her mind, what memories or experiences shaped the calm strength she carried. She had clearly faced challenges before, challenges that demanded resilience and self-discipline. That much was evident in every controlled movement, every measured glance. At one point, a soft announcement came through the vehicle's speakers, noting an upcoming transfer point. Daniel adjusted his bag, preparing for the next leg of the journey. The soldier did the same, lifting her bag slightly, checking the straps. As she moved, her eyes briefly met Daniel's again. This time, there was a subtle acknowledgement, something more than the simple nod from before. It was a recognition of shared understanding, of mutual respect between two people who had witnessed and endured a situation together. No words were exchanged, but the meaning was clear. Just as the vehicle approached a stop, a uniformed officer entered. He moved with purpose, scanning the cabin with a measured gaze. Daniel noticed the soldier straighten further, a subtle tension returning, though less pronounced than before. There was a sense of readiness in her posture, the kind that comes from experience and training. The officer's eyes landed briefly on her, and Daniel's curiosity was piqued. He didn't move or interfere. He simply watched, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. The officer approached and spoke quietly, his tone respectful yet firm. The soldier responded with equal professionalism, her words clear, concise, and polite. Daniel couldn't hear everything from his position, but the exchange had a rhythm of familiarity. There was a recognition of authority, yes, but also of capability. The soldier's confidence was evident, and the officer treated her as someone who deserved respect, as someone competent and assured. Daniel could see the change in her demeanor as she interacted with him, a combination of relief and professionalism, a natural shift from the tension she had endured earlier. When the officer moved on, the soldier returned to her seat, her posture easing once more. Daniel could see a flicker of something new in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the recognition she had received. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a small shift from self-protection to quiet confidence. She had navigated the earlier harassment and emerged without losing her composure. And now, in this unexpected acknowledgement, there was a hint of something more personal, a recognition of worth that went beyond the uniform, beyond the training, beyond the public eye. Daniel remained seated, observing. He felt a quiet sense of admiration, not just for her endurance, but for her ability to carry herself with dignity in the face of discomfort. It was a quality that was rare, and one he understood deeply. Life often demanded resilience, not only in grand acts of heroism, but in the small, everyday moments where patience and strength were required. This was one of those moments. The vehicle slowed for another stop, allowing passengers to exit and enter. A brief announcement came over the speakers, noting the transfer point for the next leg of the journey. Daniel adjusted his bag and helped his son prepare to stand. The soldier, aware of the movement around her, shifted slightly, checking the straps of her bag and ensuring it was secure. There was a precision in her actions that spoke of experience and careful training. She was young, but she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had learned the value of preparation and focused out as passengers moved. Daniel noticed a brief interaction that caught him by surprise. A young woman, seated a few rows ahead, approached the soldier quietly, speaking in hushed tones. There was a nod, a brief exchange of gestures, and a moment of recognition that seemed to pass between them. Daniel observed discreetly, sensing that there was more to this soldier than he had realized. Something about the quiet confidence, the poise, and the respect others afforded her suggested a background that was not immediately visible. He wondered who she truly was, and why her presence commanded subtle attention despite the harassment she had endured earlier. The soldier returned to her seat as the young woman moved on. Daniel noticed a faint, fleeting expression, a mix of composure, relief, and a subtle acknowledgement of her own identity. He realized then that the soldier was someone of significance, though the exact nature of it was still unclear. It wasn't arrogance or pride that carried her. It was quiet competence, earned through experience and reinforced by others' recognition. That realization deepened Daniel's respect for her even further. She had not sought attention, yet her presence demanded it. Minutes passed in a quiet rhythm, the vehicle moving steadily forward. Daniel watched the soldier, noting the subtle changes in posture, the careful adjustments of her uniform, the way she interacted with the environment around her. She was aware, alert, and controlled, yet there was a softness beneath the discipline, a humanity that shone through in small, fleeting gestures. Daniel appreciated that. He understood that strength and humanity were not opposites. They were complementary, each enhancing the other. Then, almost suddenly, a moment of revelation came. As the vehicle approached a major stop, an announcement was made over the speakers, noting that a distinguished passenger was aboard and requesting attention from relevant personnel. Daniel's curiosity sharpened as he noticed a quiet ripple among the staff. The soldier adjusted her posture, calm but alert, and a uniformed officer approached briefly, offering a nod and a respectful acknowledgement. It was then that Daniel began to piece together the truth. The soldier was not just any service member. She carried a legacy, a significance that was not immediately apparent, but now became clear in subtle interactions and recognition from those around her. Daniel's mind raced. The respect, the careful attention, the professionalism, and the quiet acknowledgement from officers, it all began to make sense. This young woman, who had endured harassment quietly, who had carried herself with dignity, was someone of considerable importance. Not because she demanded it, but because her actions, her composure, and her presence naturally commanded it. She was connected to people of authority, yet she had faced the same human challenges as anyone else. She was, in fact, the daughter of a high-ranking official, a general, though she had never let that define her behavior or demand special treatment. Daniel felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. The revelation did not diminish her actions. If anything, it highlighted her character. She had not relied on her lineage or status to protect herself. She had endured, quietly and gracefully, relying on her own strength and the small, steady support of others who recognized decency when they saw it. That was true courage, the kind that did not require recognition or accolades. The vehicle continued on, the city outside moving past in a blur. Daniel allowed himself a moment to reflect. He had witnessed an extraordinary lesson in human dignity, quiet courage, and the power of presence. The soldier had faced bullying, endured it, and maintained composure. And Daniel, by simply being present and acting with calm authority, had contributed to restoring her space in that moment. It was a reminder that small actions, grounded in decency and respect, could have profound effects. As the journey moved forward, Daniel felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And the soldier, unknowingly, had reinforced that lesson through her response, her dignity, and her composure. The unspoken understanding between them carried more weight than any formal acknowledgement ever could. It was a reminder that human connection, respect, and courage were timeless values, always relevant, and often revealed in the simplest moments of everyday life. The vehicle slowed as it approached the final stop on the route. Sunlight had grown brighter, casting a warm glow across the seats and highlighting the faint expressions of fatigue and alertness on the faces of passengers. Daniel adjusted his bag, preparing his son to step off when the time came. His mind, however, lingered on the soldier across the aisle. She had endured so much quietly, yet maintained composure, discipline, and strength. There was something quietly remarkable about her, something that went beyond uniforms or titles. Daniel felt a quiet pride, not for himself, but for being part of a small, human moment where decency and courage intersected. The soldier shifted her bag again, checking the straps carefully. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and precise. It was evident that she was aware of the passengers around her and the dynamics that had unfolded earlier. Daniel noticed how subtle yet powerful her presence was, how she carried herself not with arrogance, but with quiet authority. There was strength in humility, he realized, and he had witnessed it in a raw and genuine way today. His son tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Dad, can we go now?" The boy's voice was soft, filled with the innocent curiosity of someone too young to fully grasp the depth of what had just happened. Daniel smiled, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. "Yes, we can. But remember what we saw today. Courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just being yourself and standing steady when others try to push you down." The boy nodded, absorbing the lesson in the way children do through observation more than words. The soldier finally stood, her bag resting securely against her shoulder. She moved with care, aware of the space around her. Daniel subtly shifted to allow her a clear path, keeping his son close. There was no rush, no dramatic gesture, only careful, respectful movement. It was the same quiet dignity she had displayed throughout the journey, aware, controlled, and considerate. As she passed by, her eyes met Daniel's. This time, the look held a depth he hadn't seen before. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition, acknowledgement, and a silent understanding of what had transpired. No words were exchanged, yet the moment was profound. It was a human connection, forged in the smallest of acts, yet powerful enough to leave an impression neither of them would forget. The soldier paused for a moment, turning slightly as if considering whether to speak. Then, in a low voice, polite and unassuming, she said, "Thank you." It was simple, genuine, and heartfelt. Daniel nodded, keeping his reply equally modest. "You're welcome. You didn't need to handle that alone." He didn't elaborate. There was no need. The acknowledgement was enough. The mutual respect hung between them like an unspoken promise. The world could be unfair, but decency existed, and people still looked out for one another. The soldier moved on, and Daniel watched as she navigated the crowd of passengers waiting at the stop. People parted slightly to make way, giving her a measure of space, unconsciously recognizing her presence. He realized then that her strength wasn't just in her own endurance. It radiated outward. Others instinctively respected it, whether they knew her background or not. She had carried herself with such integrity and quiet authority that recognition came naturally, without demand. That was a rare and remarkable quality. As she disappeared through the doors of the vehicle, Daniel felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The remaining passengers carried on with their own routines, yet there was a faint echo of respect left behind. The silence after her departure felt weighty, as if the vehicle itself had absorbed a small lesson in human dignity. Daniel glanced down at his son, who was looking curiously at the doors through which the soldier had exited. "Do you see that?" Daniel asked softly. "She was brave today, not because she had to be, but because she chose to be. And she earned respect quietly, not with words, but with her actions." The boy nodded, thoughtful, sensing the importance of the moment, even without understanding all its nuances. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of quiet completion. The journey had started like any other day, with routine and ordinary motions. Yet it had transformed into something deeply human and instructive. He had seen courage, dignity, and resilience in a young soldier who carried more than just her uniform. She carried her own identity, training, and the weight of her lineage with grace. He had witnessed bullying and unfairness, but also intervention, support, and the restoration of respect. And in the midst of it all, a small human connection had formed, understated but lasting. As the vehicle moved to the final stop for him and his son, Daniel reflected on the lessons of the morning. Life presented challenges in many forms, some visible, some hidden. Often, the people who seemed quiet or unassuming bore the greatest strength. And sometimes, All it took to make a difference was being present, acting with calm authority, and standing up for what was right. These lessons were not abstract. They were lived, experienced, and profoundly human. He helped his son down from the seat, guiding him carefully through the crowd. "Remember," he said softly, "it's not always about fighting or proving yourself. Sometimes it's about knowing when to step in, when to stand steady, and when to let someone reclaim their space." The boy nodded again, absorbing the words in his own way. Children had a remarkable ability to understand these lessons without the need for lengthy explanation. They felt them, intuitively, through the actions they observed. Outside the vehicle, the city was fully awake. People moved along sidewalks, buses passed by, and the sun shone warmly on the streets. Daniel and his son walked toward their next destination, each step a reminder that the morning's events were now part of the rhythm of the day. Yet the memory of the soldier, her quiet strength, and the moment of human connection lingered. Subtle but unshakable. Daniel thought about her journey, the challenges she had faced, and the quiet dignity with which she had handled them. She had carried herself not with entitlement, despite her background, but with composure and respect. Her actions had spoken louder than any rank, title, or lineage could convey. It was a lesson in humility and courage that Daniel carried with him, a reminder that character was revealed in how one treated others, especially in difficult moments. He glanced back briefly, imagining the soldier walking with purpose, her head held high, carrying not just her belongings, but the quiet confidence earned through discipline, endurance, and personal integrity. She had faced harassment, endured it, and reclaimed her dignity without making a spectacle. That was the kind of courage Daniel valued most, the kind that inspired quietly, without demand for recognition or reward. As they continued down the street, Daniel felt a renewed sense of responsibility. The world could be unfair, but there were small ways to intervene, to restore balance, and to show respect. One act of decency could ripple outward in ways unseen, creating connections, shifting attitudes, and reminding others of the humanity in all of us. The morning had been a living lesson in this truth, and he intended to carry it forward, not just for himself, but for his son, teaching by example the power of quiet courage and integrity. When they reached their destination, Daniel paused, looking down at his son. "Today, we saw something important," he said. "We saw that standing up for someone doesn't always need to be loud. It just needs to be right." The boy's eyes were wide with understanding, and Daniel knew the lesson had been felt deeply. It was the kind of insight that would stay with him, growing over time as he experienced his own moments of challenge and choice. Daniel smiled softly, feeling a sense of closure. The soldier's journey and his own had intersected in a fleeting but meaningful way. Neither had sought recognition, yet both had contributed to a small restoration of balance, dignity, and respect. That was the essence of human connection, the quiet acknowledgement of one another's worth, the courage to act when needed, and the understanding that even small gestures could carry profound significance. He took his son's hand, guiding him forward. The city continued to buzz around them, alive with possibility. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude for the morning, for the chance to witness courage in its most authentic form, and for the quiet, unspoken lessons that would linger long after the day ended. He knew the soldier would continue her path, carrying her dignity and strength with her, and that their brief encounter had left a subtle mark on him as well, a reminder that integrity, courage, and human kindness were always worth cultivating. As they walked away, Daniel looked back one last time, imagining the soldier moving through the city with purpose and calm authority. He knew that she had faced her own challenges, that her strength was her own, but that the support offered in that small, quiet moment had mattered. It had restored a piece of her space, affirmed her dignity, and created a connection that, while brief, was deeply human. Daniel carried that memory with him, a quiet affirmation that the world, despite its challenges, could still make room for respect, courage, and kindness. The morning had started as any other day, ordinary and routine, but it had become extraordinary through simple acts of humanity. Daniel realized that life's most meaningful moments were not always recorded or recognized. They were lived, felt, and remembered in the quiet spaces between ordinary events. And in that realization, he found a sense of peace, a renewed commitment to living with integrity, and a profound appreciation for the strength and courage that existed quietly in the people around him. Daniel and his son moved forward into the rhythm of the day, carrying with them the memory of courage, dignity, and quiet heroism. It was a lesson in life, in human connection, and in the subtle power of standing up for what is right, even in small ways. And in that lesson, the morning's events became timeless, leaving an imprint that neither time nor circumstance could erase.